William Rivertoe, a local businessman who had successfully invested his parents' money, suddenly realized that his driver was heading in a completely different direction. "Hey, where are you taking me, James? Answer me right now." He was about to knock on the expensive leather of the driver's seat when suddenly his face was covered by a small, light hand. "I saw the old man talking to your driver," whispered a girl who had jumped out from the back seat. William finally recognized her. It was Casey, the daughter of his cleaning lady, Alma. She continued in a quick whisper, "I know they want to do something bad to you, and we're going to stop them. But we need to be quiet for a little while, okay?" William Rivertop nodded slowly. There was something in her dark eyes that made him believe her. But not long ago, everything was different. William Rivertoe's gold-nibbed pen glided smoothly across the thick paper of the contract. Having signed a stack of papers today, he set the documents aside without even glancing at their contents, feeling only his usual boredom. David Clark, his personal assistant, picked up the signed sheets, carefully aligning them in a stack, and said in his usual honeyed tone, "Impeccable, Sir Rivertop. Your decision, as always, will bring significant profits to shareholders this quarter. I will send this to the legal department immediately." William merely nodded, not looking at David, his gaze turning to the panorama of New Orleans, where the luxury of the business center abruptly gave way to dreary neighborhoods. And this sudden thought of contrast caused him an inexplicable nausea. He stood up abruptly, pushing back the heavy dark wood chair, and walked across the silent carpet to the door, his expensive shoes making no sound, while David hurried forward to open the door, bowing his head respectfully. "Is there anything else you would like, sir? Or shall I order a limousine to take you out immediately?" "The limousine is already waiting, David." "I'm leaving," William said curtly, stepping into the cool space of the hall, lined with polished marble, where he was enveloped by silence, broken only by a faint rustling. In the corner of the hall, by a column, Alma, the cleaning lady, slowly and methodically wiped the already gleaming floor with a damp cloth, her back bent under an invisible weight, beads of sweat glistening on her temples beneath short, dark curls, and a squeaky bucket on wheels standing nearby. William's gaze slid over her without lingering, as if she were part of the interior, and he moved toward the elevators. But Alma, sensing his approach, instinctively recoiled, pressing the rag to her chest and lowering her eyes, her fingers clenching the wet fabric convulsively. William pressed the elevator button, and at that moment, a memory suddenly pierced his consciousness. His father's cold eyes handing him the keys to his first office 20 years ago, and his words, dry as a whip, "Don't ruin what we've built, Will, don't disgrace the name." The elevator arrived with a soft chime. The doors slid open. William stepped inside, feeling the icy emptiness of the memory, and the metal doors closed, cutting off the view of the lobby and Alma's hunched figure. Downstairs at the entrance, a black limousine was waiting for him, the driver in livery already holding the door open. "Where to, Mr. Rivertoop?" "To the club, James, and take your time today," William replied, sinking into the cool leather interior, and the car glided away, carrying him away from the glass towers in the heart of the city. The limousine drove along wide avenues, past elegant shop windows, but gradually the streets narrowed, the facades of the houses lost their luster, barbed wire fences appeared, paint peeled off, and William mechanically leaned back against the headrest, looking through the tinted glass at this other world. On the sidewalk, by a crooked fence, an 8-year-old black girl, Casey, was bouncing a ball, her bright dress a splash of color against the dreary grayness, and she looked up for a moment, watching the black limousine float by before the ball bounced off the cracked asphalt again. Tom Harper, his old friend, stood in the spacious foyer of Rivertop's office, watching the limousine disappear around the corner, and shook his head, his kind face clouded by a shadow of disappointment. "Back into your cocoon, Will, running away from the real world and the real people who need your help." David Clark appeared out of nowhere and approached Tom with feigned politeness. "Mr. Harper, Mr. Rivertop has just left, but I can pass on your message if it's as important as always." I will, David, Tom replied firmly, looking the assistant straight in the eye. Tell him that the Hope Children's Home will close in a month without urgent help, and that I'm waiting for his call when he remembers what it means to be a human being, not just a bank account. David just smiled politely, without batting an eyelid. I'll be sure to pass it on, Mr. Harper. Your zeal for charity is always admirable. Tom turned and walked out into the street, his steps heavy, his head filled with his recent conversation with William, their argument in this very office. You can change hundreds of lives, Will. Not just numbers on an account, but the real lives of children. Lives are changed by the market, Tom, not by charity, William had replied, examining his expensive pen. I don't buy gratitude, and I don't play the savior. Alma, having finished her shift, walked home along the familiar road, past the same shabby houses, her thoughts filled with anxiety for Casey, for their future, for this city that could be both kind and cruel at the same time. She remembered how her husband, Marcus, had once said to her, holding her hand tightly, "We'll get through this, Alma. I'll get justice at work, and you'll raise our little girl. The main thing is not to lose hope." Hope, like the shelter that was about to close, now seemed as fragile as the piece of glass Casey had found on the sidewalk. Alma carefully closed the door of her modest apartment behind her, her shoulders slumping under the weight of exhaustion, and her fingers automatically reached for the pin holding her tight bun, slowly removing it and allowing her dark curls to fall down her neck. Casey sat at a plastic table by the window, her slender fingers carefully turning the pages of a worn library book about dinosaurs, her lips moving silently, repeating the complicated names, and the rays of the setting sun gilded her dark skin. "Mommy!" the girl exclaimed happily, tearing herself away from the book and rushing to the door, her face lit up with a broad smile that revealed a neat gap between her front teeth. Alma crouched down, opening her arms, and Casey nestled into them, wrapping her arms tightly around her mother's neck, while Alma hugged her daughter, breathing in the familiar scent of children's shampoo and dust from the street. "My clever girl, what interesting things did you read today?" They prepared a simple dinner together, macaroni with tomato sauce, and set the plates on the same table, the silence of the apartment broken only by the clatter of spoons and the distant hum of the city. Alma glanced at the photo of Marcus in his police uniform standing on the dresser, his calm, confident eyes looking at them, and she sighed involuntarily, her fingers clenching the edge of the table. Casey noticed the sigh and suddenly said, looking at her mother with her big, serious eyes, "Mom, I saw that angry old man near Mr. Rich's big glass house today." Alma looked up sharply, her spoon frozen halfway to her mouth, alarm flashing in her eyes. "What old man, Casey? Where exactly did you see him? Tell me everything in detail." "He was very angry, Mom," Casey continued, frowning as she tried to remember the details. "He was waving a stick and yelling at Mr. Rich as he got out of his car, and Mr. Rich just laughed and walked away, and the old man stood there for a long time, staring after him as if he wanted to hit him." "My God, Casey," Alma whispered, pushing her plate away, her face pale. "You must remember once and for all, other people's quarrels, especially those of people like that, are none of your business and very dangerous. You mustn't go near them. You mustn't listen. Do you understand me?" That same morning, Tom Harper strode purposefully across the marble hall of the Rivertop office, passing Alma, who was cleaning the glass partition, and his gaze met hers for a moment. She looked tired but kind, and he nodded in greeting before heading for the elevator. He entered William's office without knocking, finding him watching the stock market reports on a huge monitor, and David Clark immediately darted out of his corner, trying to stop him. "Mr. Rivertop is busy, Mr. Harper. He has an important conference call in 5 minutes." "Cancel it, David," Tom said sharply, without taking his eyes off William, who slowly turned in his chair, a slight irritation on his face. "We need to talk, Will. Urgently and frankly." David froze in indecision, his fingers nervously fingering the edge of the tablet, and William waved his hand. "All right, David. Postpone the conference for half an hour and close the door behind you." When the assistant disappeared, Tom approached the table, pressing his palms against the polished tabletop. "The Hope Children's Home, Will, the one where we used to hand out gifts, remember? It will close in a month if it doesn't find a sponsor, and 30 children will be left on the street. William leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping on the armrests. It's sad, Tom, but the real estate market dictates its own rules. The land under that building is too valuable, and running the orphanage is a money-losing sentimentality. Sentimentality? Tom raised his voice, his cheeks red with indignation. These are children's lives, Will. Real children who aren't to blame for being born into your world. You can change hundreds of lives, not just numbers on a ledger, but real destinies. William smiled coldly, his eyes remaining empty. Lives are changed by the market, Tom, not by charity. I don't buy gratitude and I don't play the savior. I have shareholders who expect dividends, not stories about poor orphans. Is that so? Tom asked quietly, but with such bitterness that William looked away for a moment. So, the boy who once protected me from high school bullies for sharing my sandwich with him is now dead, somewhere within these glass walls. William didn't answer, just turned back to the monitor, and Tom turned and left, slamming the door so hard that the glass partitions shook. David Clark, who had been lurking around the corner and overheard the entire conversation, quickly took out his phone, his fingers trembling as he typed a short message. Harper asked for money for the Hope Shelter. Rivertop refused. He's dismissive. Is the plan still on? The reply came almost instantly. Good. Wait for instructions. Soon he'll pay for everything. Pay for... David frantically deleted the message, looking around, and his gaze fell on Alma, who was still washing the glass. Her face was expressionless, but he didn't notice how her hand tightened the rag for a moment at the mention of the Hope Shelter. That evening, as she tucked Casey into bed, Alma sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, stroking her daughter's hair, her thoughts returning to Marcus, to his last morning. Watch over Casey, Alma. Teach her to see people, not just their actions, and teach her to be cautious, he said then, adjusting the badge on his uniform. I saw his eyes, Mom, Casey whispered, already falling asleep. The old man's, they were like a wounded animal's, scary. Alma shuddered. Her hand froze on her daughter's head, and her heart sank with an icy foreboding. Jacob Moreland sat in the stifling semi-darkness of the back booth of the cheap diner Dirty Jack's near the harbor, his bony fingers clenching a glass of cheap whiskey, his cloudy eyes staring lifelessly at the sticky surface of the table, covered with rings from glasses and grease stains. He took a deep, burning sip, but the acrid liquid did not drown out the burning hatred that had been building up in his parched soul for decades, only fueling the hellish flames of revenge. Rivertob! He hissed through clenched yellow teeth, and the glass crashed onto the tabletop. Soon you'll know what it's like to lose everything, like I did, when your thief of a father stole my life. A painful memory pierced his consciousness. He, a young, hopeful engineer, handing over the blueprints for a revolutionary pump to old Rivertop in his luxurious office with trembling hands, and Rivertop, without even looking, throwing the folder into the corner with the words, "Rubbish, Moreland, don't make my shareholders laugh." A month later, he launched his pump, an exact copy, and made a fortune, while Jake's daughter, Emily, died in a squalid shack without money for medicine. For Emily, for all the years in the dirt, Jake whispered hoarsely, wiping the sudden moisture from his wrinkled cheek with his rough sleeve. You'll pay dearly, you puppy. You'll pay with humiliation and fear. The harsh vibration of an old phone in his coat pocket pulled him out of his nightmare. With trembling fingers, he took out the device and read David's message. Rivertop refused the shelter. He's cold as ice. Perfect timing. Same schedule. A cruel smile twisted Jake's face, and his fingers, despite their trembling, quickly typed a reply. Tomorrow, 5 p.m. His car is at the back exit. Our driver is there. Wait for the signal. His nightmare is about to begin. He finished his whiskey, threw the crumpled dollars on the bar, and stumbled out into the foul-smelling twilight of the alley, his long, crooked shadow creeping along the brick wall, merging with the city grime and darkness. In her narrow bed, Casey tossed and turned in a feverish sleep, her forehead covered with sweat, her thin fingers clutching the edge of the blanket. She dreamed of a black car racing through a narrow tunnel, the evil eyes of an old man flashing in the darkness, and the loud, piercing scream of a man that made her blood run cold. She screamed in her sleep, sat up abruptly in bed, her little heart beating wildly like a trapped bird, and hot tears of fear streaming down her cheeks. "Mom," she whispered hoarsely, looking around the dark room. But Alma, exhausted from a long shift, was fast asleep behind the thin partition. Casey carefully slid out of bed, went to the steamy window, behind which a street lamp flickered dimly, and pressed her hot forehead against the cold glass, trying to drive back the terror that gripped her throat. In the morning, while Alma warmed up yesterday's porridge on the stove, Casey sat silently at the plastic table, her fingers clenching the worn-colored pencils, and with a concentrated look on her face, she drew on the back of an old electricity bill. An angular black car with the pale, contorted face of a man in an expensive suit peering out of the window, a faceless man behind the wheel, just a dark shadow, and next to the car, huge and sinister, stood an old man with a stick, his eyes in the drawing simply black, bottomless dots. Alma, placing a bowl in front of her daughter, glanced at the drawing, and her face contorted in pure horror, the plate almost slipping from her weakened hands. "Casey, my God, what is this? Where did you... It's a dream, Mom," the girl replied quietly without looking up from her pencils. "A scary dream, about Mr. Rich in a black car, and an evil old man, and screaming." Alma grabbed the drawing, her hands shaking noticeably, and Marcus's calm voice rang in her ears. "Children's souls, Alma, sometimes see shadows of the future. Don't ignore her fears. Listen." "He's in danger," she whispered, pressing the sheet to her chest, feeling an icy wave of fear wash over her. "This dream is a warning." She frantically grabbed the old phone, her fingers feverishly dialing the number of the police station where Marcus worked, but her finger froze over the call button. What would she say? That her 8-year-old daughter had drawn a nightmare about a millionaire? They would laugh at her, or send her to a psychologist. Meanwhile, William Rivertaub was leisurely enjoying breakfast on the spacious, sun-drenched terrace of his penthouse, his gaze indifferently glancing over the newspaper columns, not lingering on a short article about the imminent closure of the Hope Orphanage. He took a sip of freshly brewed espresso, enjoying the view of the river, his thoughts preoccupied with the upcoming golf game, not the fate of homeless children or the pathetic old man he had long since written off as a nuisance. David Clark, pale and trim, was already waiting in the office, nervously shuffling papers when William entered, sweeping off his silk robe. "Morning, David. Plan for the day?" "Everything's clear, sir," David replied, trying to keep his voice steady. A meeting with the board of directors at 10, lunch with the bankers at La Pearl at 1, and at 5 in the evening. He swallowed audibly. "At 5 in the evening, Mr. Edwards is expecting you for dinner at his club on Pine Street. The limousine will be waiting at the rear service entrance, as you requested, to avoid pesky reporters." "Excellent," William nodded, settling into his chair and launching the stock quotes on his monitors. "Make sure they serve my 90 Burgundy at La Pearl, and we'll seal the deal of the century with Edwards." "Will do, sir." David bowed respectfully, quickly retreating, and in the empty corridor, leaning against the cold wall, he wiped the large beads of sweat from his forehead. His phone vibrated plaintively. A message from Jake. 5 p.m. Back exit. Don't screw up. The beginning of the end? Alma, still unable to muster the courage to call, clutched Casey's hand tightly as she walked her to the school gates, her eyes feverishly scanning the morning crowd for the slightest sign of danger. "Listen to me, sweetheart," she said, crouching down in front of her daughter, her voice trembling. "If you see that old man, or that black car, run straight to Miss Ellen or call the police. Don't go near them. Don't talk to anyone." "I'll remember, Mom." Casey nodded seriously, her large brown eyes filled with an unchildlike determination. "I'll be careful, just like Dad taught me before that day." She hugged Alma tightly and ran toward the school building, her mother watching her go, clutching the crumpled drawing in her pocket like a last talisman, and silently praying that her daughter's terrifying vision would remain nothing more than a nightmare. Jake Moreland was methodically cleaning an old revolver in a dilapidated garage on the scrapyard. Despite his shaking hands, his movements were precise, and his deep-set eyes burned with an icy, inhuman fire of long-awaited revenge. "Soon, William Rivertop," he hissed, loading heavy bullets into the cylinder. "Soon you will look into the abyss you have created with your parasitic life." A black limousine, like a huge, glossy scarab beetle, rolled silently up to the inconspicuous service entrance of the Rivertop Industries office tower at exactly 5 p.m., its tinted windows reflecting the fading rays of the setting sun, which painted the sky over New Orleans in disturbing shades of crimson and orange. William Rivertop adjusted the perfect knot of his tie made of the finest silk and stepped out of the cool shadow of the building, his expensive shoes confidently stepping onto the asphalt of the alley, where the smell of rotting garbage from overflowing bins already lingered, contrasting sharply with the aromas of his penthouse. With a practiced gesture, he opened the heavy door of the limousine without looking at the driver, whose face was hidden by a standard cap, and sank into the cool, familiar luxury of the leather interior, saturated with the scent of expensive polish. "To Edwards Club, James on Pine Street, and take your time. We're not in a hurry," he said absently, leaning back against the soft headrest and closing his eyes, mentally rehearsing his arguments for the upcoming merger negotiations that promised billions in profits. The car moved smoothly out of the narrow alley onto a busier street, but instead of making the usual turn toward the center, where the elite club was located, the driver unexpectedly turned in the opposite direction, into a maze of increasingly gloomy and deserted industrial streets lined with tall, gloomy warehouses with blank, shabby walls. William, sensing that something was wrong, opened his eyes, his eyebrows furrowing in slight irritation. "James, where are you going? Pine Street is in the other direction. Turn around immediately. Have you lost the map?" The driver remained silent, only increasing his speed, and the limousine hummed hollowly as it sped deeper into an increasingly deserted area where the few streetlights were already flickering with a dim, sickly light. "James, I order you to stop this instant." William's voice, usually calm and authoritative, sounded with an unusual note of alarm, his fingers instinctively clutching the door handle, only to discover that the central locking system had been activated. "Can you hear me? Stop the car." At that moment, a small figure emerged from the deep shadow behind the passenger seat, where the umbrella was usually kept, and William turned abruptly and was astonished to see the wide-open, genuinely terrified eyes of a black girl he had glimpsed near his office. Casey. She pressed her finger to her lips, her thin body trembling like a leaf in the wind, and when she spoke, her voice was barely audible, a strangled whisper full of desperate pleading. "Mr. Rivertop, please shut up right now. I beg you. He's taking you the wrong way. I saw this man talking to another man. Everything will be fine. Just keep quiet." William froze, his irritation instantly replaced by a chilling sense of foreboding. He peered at the back of the driver's head, and sure enough, it wasn't James. The stranger's shoulders were broader, and the hair under his cap was darker. "Casey, how did you—" "What?" he began, but the girl hissed desperately again, her eyes widening even more, filled with tears. "Quiet. He can hear us. He's bad. I know." The limousine screeched to a halt and swerved into a dark, narrow cul-de-sac between two huge, abandoned grain silos, its headlights illuminating the trash-strewn and broken brick cul-de-sac where they were already waiting, blocking the only exit, by two black SUVs with no license plates and their headlights turned off. The SUV doors flew open simultaneously, and four burly men in dark balaclavas, armed with pistols and clubs, spilled out, their movements quick and precise like predators. William instinctively stepped back, his hand reaching for the phone in his jacket pocket, but the limousine door on his side was ripped off its hinges with a wild clang by one of the attackers, and rough gloved hands grabbed the expensive fabric of his suit, pulling him out with force. "No, let go. What do you want? Money? Take it," William shouted, desperately trying to break free, his voice breaking into a shrill scream, full of animal fear he had never felt before. A blow to the solar plexus with a club bent him in half, knocking the air out of his lungs and robbing him of speech. He collapsed to his knees on the cold, dirty asphalt, choking on pain and humiliation. Casey, who had remained in the cab, huddled in the corner, her small body shaking with sobs. She closed her eyes, trying to hide from the horror, but one of the men noticed her and grabbed her arm roughly. "Hey, boss, there's another passenger here." The girl, who was eavesdropping. "Bring her to," came a hoarse voice familiar to Casey from her nightmares, from the shadows of one of the SUVs. Jake Moreland slowly stepped into the headlights, his face contorted in a grimace of triumphant hatred, looking like the embodiment of evil. "No witnesses! And hurry up before someone hears the screams of this rich brat." The man yanked Casey out of the car, and she screamed in pain and fear. "Let me go now." Her scream merged with William's hoarse groan, as he was roughly lifted off the ground and his hands were tied behind his back. Thick, chemical-smelling bags were pulled tightly over both their heads, plunging them into absolute suffocating darkness. Rough hands threw William onto the hard metal floor of one of the SUVs. He heard Casey's quiet sobs nearby, followed by a hollow thud as a fist struck the side of the vehicle, and Jake's angry voice, "Let's go!" and not a sound, or you know what will happen to them. The engines roared, the SUVs sped off, taking the captives into the unknown, and all that remained in the dirty cul-de-sac was the abandoned limousine with the gaping emptiness of its torn door, a silent witness to the beginning of the most terrifying nightmare in the lives of William Rivertop and 8-year-old Casey. An icy wave of dampness mixed with the sharp smell of mold rust and something indescribably rotten crashed into William Rivertop's consciousness, causing him to gasp for air. But instead of air, the same acrid mixture rushed into his lungs, triggering a painful coughing fit. He tried to move, but his body, bound by excruciating pain in his solar plexus and stiff plastic ties digging into his wrists behind his back, only twitched helplessly on the cold, sticky concrete floor. The thick bag was still suffocating him, turning the world into absolute oppressive blackness, devoid of sound except for his own ragged breathing and the ringing in his ears from the recent blow. A quiet, suppressed sob sounded nearby, like the squeak of a frightened chick, and William remembered Casey with horror, her desperate whispers in the car, her scream. "Girl," he croaked through the fabric of the bag, his voice sounding strange and broken. "Are you here? Are you alive?" The only response was another bout of quiet sobbing, interspersed with convulsive gasps. Rough, gloved hands suddenly grabbed William by the shoulders, sat him down abruptly, leaning his back against something cold and uneven, probably a rusty pipe, and then yanked the bag off his head. A blinding beam of light from a powerful lantern struck him directly in the eyes, forcing him to squint against the sharp pain, and he groaned as he tried to turn away, when his vision gradually adjusted to the dim light, making out the contours of the gloomy dungeon. Tall brick walls covered with soot and cobwebs, piles of incomprehensible junk, leaking pipes under the ceiling. William saw Casey. She was tied to a similar pipe 2 steps away from him, her face pale beneath her dark skin, tears smeared across it, her huge eyes filled with silent horror staring at him, her mouth taped shut with wide strips of duct tape. Her thin body shook with sobs she couldn't make. "Look, rich man," came a hoarse voice familiar from the dead end, and Jacob Moreland slowly emerged from the shadows behind the lamplight, his face furrowed with deep wrinkles and hatred, looking as if it had been carved from an old poisonous tree. "Your only witness, an unfortunate child, caught up in your dirty business because of your own carelessness." Jake approached William, his old boots scraping loudly on the concrete, and kicked him hard on his expensive Oxford boot, which was sticking out pointlessly from his foot. "Well, William Rivertop, Jr.," he said, each syllable sounding like a spit. "Are you comfortable in your new reality, in your personal dump, without your daddy, without your mommy in Miami, without your toys and servants ready to lick your shoes?" William tried to straighten up, gather what was left of his dignity, his voice trembling with anger and humiliation. "You won't get anywhere, Moreland. They're already looking for me. The police, my people, they'll find you. Jake laughed loudly, his laughter echoing through the basement, causing Casey to huddle even closer to the pipe. Your loyal dog, David, is that who you mean? He's been my man for a long time, boy. He hates you for your arrogance, for rubbing his nose in his poverty, while you bathe in the gold your thief of a father stole from me. He leaned forward, his face contorted into a grimace, inches from William's face, the smell of cheap tobacco and whiskey hitting his nostrils. He stole my idea, my pump, my life. He condemned me to poverty while his son rode around on a golden pony. And when my Emily... Jake's voice suddenly broke, and a look of genuine, inhuman pain flashed in his eyes, and he turned away for a moment, clenching his fists so tightly that his knuckles turned white. When my daughter was dying of fever in a shack without medicine I couldn't afford, your father was buying himself a third yacht club. The memory of the girl, feverish and delirious on a thin mattress, her weak voice saying, "Daddy, I'm so cold," pierced Jake like a knife, and he straightened up abruptly, his eyes dry and icy. "And now here you are," he continued, looking at William again with murderous contempt, "the heir who didn't earn a penny through honest labor, who just multiplied what he stole. You think I just want your money? No, I want to break you, make you feel the helplessness, the filth that I felt." He signaled to one of his men standing in the shadows. The man approached Casey, roughly tore the tape from her mouth. She cried out in pain, and shoved a plastic bottle of murky water into her hands. "Drink, baby," Jake said, keeping his eyes on William. "You've got a long time to watch this empty sack of skin and expensive clothes rot here until he agrees to give up everything he has. And then we'll see what to do with you." Casey greedily clutched the bottle, spilling water on her dress, her eyes full of tears, darting between Jake's angry face and William's pale face, contorted with fear and rage. "Your fate," Jake said slowly, with sadistic pleasure, pointing his finger at Casey, "is in the hands of this nobody girl. He can't even save himself, let alone you. Look at him, the heir to an empire of lice and filth." He spat almost at William's feet, turned, and disappeared into the darkness of the basement, leaving them under the watchful eye of a silent guard with a pistol at his waist. The lantern went out, plunging the basement into almost complete darkness, broken only by drops of water falling somewhere in the corner, and Casey's stifled sobs. William Rivertoup closed his eyes, feeling an icy wave of humiliation and fear wash over him, and Jake's words about David, about the theft, about the death of Emily, about his own worthlessness, rang in his ears, merging into a cacophony of nightmares from which there was no escape. For the first time in his life, he realized that he was not the master of his own destiny, but a pathetic toy in the hands of a man embittered by fate. The sun, merciless and bright, rose over New Orleans, flooding the streets of the poor neighborhood with warm light, where Alma, who had not slept a wink all night, had been pacing around her tiny apartment, her hands trembling as she fumbled with Casey's crumpled drawing of a black car and an angry old man, her eyes filled with silent horror at the thought of her daughter not coming home. She dialed Casey's cell phone number for the 5th time in a row, hearing only short beeps and an automated message, "The subscriber is temporarily unavailable," before throwing the old phone onto the sofa in despair, letting out a muffled groan like the growl of a cornered animal. "Marcus," she whispered, looking at his photo in police uniform. "What should I do? Where is our girl? Help me." The memory of how he had taught her to act in crisis situations. "Panic is the enemy, Alma. Breathe deeply, gather your thoughts, go to those who can help," made her take a deep, shaky breath. She grabbed her keys, threw on the first jacket she could find, and ran out into the street, her legs carrying her to the nearest police station, her heart pounding, the silence of the empty apartment ringing in her ears. In the crowded, noisy station, she made her way to the duty desk, her voice hoarse and broken when she spoke. "My daughter, Casey Johnson, 8 years old, didn't come home from school yesterday. I think she's been kidnapped with Mr. Rivertop." The officer on duty, tired and indifferent, slowly looked up at her and took out a form. Last name, first name of the child, last seen, description of clothing, Mr. Rivertop, you say. William Rivertop. Alma, feeling the bureaucratic machine slowly grinding her despair, feverishly answered the questions, her fingers clenching the edge of the counter, her eyes searching the wall for Marcus's portrait among the fallen officers. He would have known what to do. "We'll put it in the database, ma'am," the officer said monotonously, placing the form in a pile. "The patrols will be given a description. Go home and wait for a call." "Wait!" Alma's voice broke into a scream, attracting the attention of other visitors. "You don't understand. She's there with him, with that millionaire. I saw the drawing. I heard her talking about the old man. They're in danger." "Without proof, ma'am, we can't," the officer began. But Alma had already stepped back, realizing the futility of the attempt, her eyes clouding with tears of helplessness, and suddenly, like a flash of inspiration, the name Tom Harper popped into her head. William's friend, the one who had come to the office, talked about the shelter, whose kind gaze had met hers as she cleaned. She rushed out of the station, frantically searching her pocket for the old business card that Tom had once handed her mechanically, when he saw her pick up a piece of paper he had dropped, "In case you or your daughter ever need help from the foundation." Her trembling fingers found the worn card, and she dialed the number, praying that he would answer. Tom Harper, sitting in his modest office at the charity and reviewing documents about the imminent closure of Hope, irritably brushed away a missed call from an unknown number, his mind preoccupied with yesterday's conversation with William and his cynical refusal. "Heartless idiot," he muttered, remembering how William had defended him at school from the older kids who had taken Tom's sandwich. "He shared with me. That means he's my friend. And you're jerks." That, Will seemed lost forever. The phone rang again, the same number. Tom sighed and picked up the receiver. "Helping Hand Foundation? Tom Harper speaking." A broken, choking female voice came over the line, full of tears and panic. "Mr. Harper, this is Alma. Alma Johnson, the cleaner at Mr. Rivertop's office. My daughter Casey is missing. She was talking about an old man who was shouting at Mr. Rivertop. And yesterday, Mr. Rivertop didn't come home either. I'm scared. I'm scared they've taken them both." Tom froze, his hand clenching the receiver so tightly that his knuckles turned white, and a cold realization flashed through his eyes. "Alma, breathe. Where are you now? Stay where you are. I'm on my way. Right now." He jumped up, grabbing his car keys, his kind face hardening with determination, if William had indeed been kidnapped. And that girl was with him? David Clark. William's personal assistant must know the latest details of his schedule. Tom raced through the city, breaking the speed limit, his brain feverishly analyzing the fragments of information. The old man, Moreland, he knew the history of their feud. William's refusal to help the shelter, perhaps the trigger for David, the disappearance of the cleaning lady at the same time as the child. He burst into the lobby of Rivertop Industries, ignoring the secretary's protests, and headed straight for David's office, throwing the door open without knocking. David Clark sat at his neat desk sorting through his mail, but his usual fake confidence had evaporated. He flinched when he saw Tom and quickly tried to hide something in the top drawer of his desk, his hand shaking noticeably. "Where's Will, David?" Tom stepped close to the desk, his voice low and dangerous. "What are you hiding?" "Mr. Harper, I don't understand." David stammered, backing away in his chair, his eyes darting around, unable to find a foothold. "Mr. Rivertop, he's away on urgent business." "Away?" Tom slammed his palm on the table, making David flinch. "Without warning, without a phone call? And he was kidnapped along with my cleaning lady's 8-year-old daughter? Speak, David. Where are they? You know this isn't kidnapping anymore. It's potential murder, and you're an accomplice." David's face turned white as a sheet, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. He saw the cold fury in Tom's eyes, the same fury that had once protected him from bullies. But now it was directed at him. I didn't mean to," he stammered, his voice breaking into a shrill whisper. He promised just money, to scare them, not to hurt them." "Who promised?" Tom leaned forward, his face inches from David's. "Moreland? Jake Moreland? Are you working for him?" David nodded, barely perceptibly, his lips trembling. He hates Rivertop, and I hated his arrogance, his contempt, always rubbing my poverty in my face while he bathed in gold. Moreland promised me a share, power. When Rivertop broke down, he began to sob, his body shaking with hysterical sobs. I didn't know about the girl, I swear. He said she was there by accident, that they would let her go. Let her go? Tom straightened up contemptuously. You're an idiot, David. Moreland is mad with hatred. Where are they? The warehouse? What warehouse? David, sobbing, reached for the top drawer and took out a small metal key card. Port. Old grain terminals. Abandoned. I don't know the exact number. But Moreland has a hiding place. Compromising information on the river tubes. Old documents. Photos of warehouses. The key to it. Here. He handed the key card to Tom with a trembling hand. If anything happens to them, David, Tom took the key, his voice icy. Their blood is on your hands. Unnoticed in the dust of the conversation, Alma stood in the office doorway, brought there by Tom. Her face was stony, and her eyes, full of inexpressible pain and anger, looked at David as if he were a snake. At that moment, another figure appeared in the hall. Detective Martin Royce, whose keen gaze instantly assessed the situation. A crying assistant, Tom, with the key in his hand, a woman with a face contorted with suffering. Martin Royce, police. He showed his badge, his voice calm, but with a steely grip. It seems you have information about the disappearance of William Rivertop and the child. Care to share? Start from the beginning, and don't leave out any details. His gaze lingered for a moment on Alma, on her eyes, filled with the same despair he had seen in his wife's eyes when they were told of their daughter's death in a shootout. A story he had never been able to solve. Now he had a chance to prevent the nightmare from repeating itself. The thick, exhausting silence of the basement that followed Jake Moreland's departure turned out to be only the calm before a new, more sophisticated storm. The deafening roar of the saw was replaced by a different kind of torture, a haunting, incessant, monotonous hum, like the workings of a giant transformer or fan somewhere in the bowels of the building above their heads, which did not fade away but penetrated to the very core, vibrating in their bones, and driving them mad with its merciless consistency. William Riverto, leaning against the cold pipe, felt every cell in his body respond to the vibration with a painful pulsation, his head splitting, and his thoughts were confused, unable to find a way out of the nightmare, exacerbated by an all-consuming thirst that turned his throat into a burning desert and the cramps of hunger that twisted his stomach into a tight, painful knot. Casey, sitting opposite him, cowered, pressing her knees to her chest and covering her ears with her hands, but the low-frequency hum penetrated her bones, causing her to moan softly. Her eyes, sunken with fatigue and fear, were fixed on a single point on the dirty floor, as if she were looking for salvation there. Suddenly, the basement door flew open with a crash, and Jake entered carrying nothing. No water, no food. Only the emptiness in his hands was more terrifying than any weapon. He slowly walked past the prisoners, his old boots echoing hollowly on the concrete, his eyes studying their suffering with cold, clinical interest. "Don't like the music, Will?" he asked almost politely, stopping in front of William. "This is the background symphony of your new world, the world of filth, hunger, and despair. Your father loved opera, remember." He crouched down, his face level with William's. "You know what's funny?" he continued, a strange, twisted note in his voice. "You don't even know what real hunger is. Real hunger is when you're willing to eat a worm from a crack in the asphalt just to numb the pain. Like Emily in her last days. She wanted an orange, so badly. One damn orange." Jake's voice faltered, his gaze drifting momentarily into the past, seeing his daughter's pale face, her dry, cracked lips whispering, "Daddy, orange." He stood up abruptly, shaking off his weakness as if it were dirt. "But we'll speed up your training, Air," he said harshly, turning to the guard. "Bring it." The guard left and returned with a simple wooden chair and a small bag of cheap fast food. The smell of fried potatoes and greasy meat hit their nostrils, causing William and Casey to instinctively tense up, their stomachs rumbling treacherously loudly. Jake sat down on the chair right in front of them, slowly and with theatrical relish, opened the bag, took out the French fries and a juicy, greasy burger. He broke off a piece of the bun, chewed slowly, savoring it loudly, then took a long straw and began to drink the ice-cold cola from a large glass, with a loud slurp, droplets of condensation running down the sides. William involuntarily swallowed the lump in his parched throat, his gaze fixed on the glass of hissing liquid. Casey gasped softly, her fingers digging into her knees. "Want some?" Jake asked, holding out a French fry toward William, his eyes sparkling with sadistic glee. "Say your father was a thief and a bastard. Say he stole my life and my daughter's life, and that it's yours." William clenched his teeth, his eyes full of hatred and despair, meeting Jake's, but his lips didn't move. "Pride," Jake sneered. "Empty. It'll break. Just like you." He looked at Casey, his face hardening. "And you, girl?" he asked, holding the glass of cola up to her, the icy liquid so close that Casey could feel its coolness. "Tell her that the man standing next to you is a cowardly parasite who lives off stolen goods. Tell her, and I'll give you a sip, a whole sip." Casey pressed herself against the pipe, her eyes wide, her lips trembling, but she said nothing, only clenching her teeth harder, remembering her father, Marcus, who had taught her on their last trip. "Bravery, Casey Bug, isn't when you're not afraid. It's when you're afraid, but you do what you have to do anyway." "Get off her, Moreland," William croaked, his voice weak but with a spark of something new in it. Not just fear for himself, but rage for his child. "This is your war with me." "Oh, defender?" Jake feigned tenderness, taking a sip of his cola. "Touching. But it's too late. You dragged her into this, William, just by existing, just like your father dragged my Emily into poverty." He stood up, finished his burger in front of them, drank the last of his cola, threw the empty cup and bag into the corner, and turned toward the exit. "The music will keep playing," he said as he left. "And the food and water. Think about your answers. Tomorrow will be too late." The door slammed shut, leaving them alone again with the buzzing darkness, the smell of the food they had eaten before their eyes, and the soul-chilling feeling of hopelessness. The guard yawned, took out his flask, took a big swig, put it down on the box next to him, and seemed to doze off. William closed his eyes, his consciousness clouding. Images of sumptuous dinners floated before him, mountains of exquisite food being indifferently thrown away, and then skinny Casey, her eyes full of silent questions and incomprehensible compassion. "Why?" he whispered, barely audibly without opening his eyes, his voice like the rustling of dry leaves. "Why did you get into that car? For me?" A long silence. Then a quiet, hoarse voice, parched with thirst. "Dad said, even in the deepest pit, you have to look for a spark of light and hold on to it. You're not evil, Mr. Rivertoe. You just lost your spark somewhere." Her words, simple and terrifying in their truth, pierced William like an electric shock. He opened his eyes and saw Casey gathering her last strength, carefully so as not to wake the dozing guard, moving her toes, trying to reach a small, crumpled plastic bottle cap, lying on the floor in a puddle of condensation dripping from the flask. Several precious drops of moisture glistened on the cap. Seeing his gaze, she pressed her finger to her lips again, her eyes shining in the darkness with determination and compassion. Millimeter by millimeter, freezing at every rustle of the guard, she pulled the cap toward her with her bare foot, grabbed it with trembling fingers and, overcoming the pain in her stiff legs, crawled across the cold, dirty concrete toward William, pressing the tiny bowl of water to her chest. "No," he whispered, feeling a lump in his throat and an unfamiliar heat of shame. "Drink it yourself. You need it more." But she was already close. Her dirty, emaciated face was serious, and her eyes looked straight into his. She raised her hand with the lid to his parched, cracked lips. "Drink," she whispered so softly that he read her lips. "The spark. It must burn." William Rivertoe, a man who had bathed in champagne and fine wines, with reverent awe, as if to a sacred object, pressed his lips to the tiny plastic cap held out by the hand of an 8-year-old black girl. A few drops of cool, incredibly sweet liquid touched his tongue, moistened his throat. Physically insignificant, but spiritually an ocean. He looked up at Casey, and for the first time in 40 years, there was no boredom, no arrogance, not even fear in his eyes, only silent, all-consuming shock, and a nascent feeling that he couldn't name, but which melted the ice in his soul. She smiled faintly at him, and in that smile burned the very spark her father had spoken of. The guard stirred. Casey quickly crawled back. William closed his eyes, but now it was not out of despair. A forgotten image floated into his mind. The kind, strict black nanny Martha, who tried to teach little Will to share his toys with the gardener's children. And he stamped his foot and shouted, "Mine! I won't give it to you! They're dirty." The bitterness of shame, sharp and cleansing, filled him now more strongly than thirst. He opened his eyes and looked into the darkness where Casey was sitting. "Thank you," he whispered so softly that it could have been just a breath. "Thank you for the spark, Casey." And for the first time in those terrible hours, something stirred in his soul and shifted from its dead center. The faint, blurred light of early morning filtered through the dusty windows of Detective Martin Royce's office at the New Orleans Police Department, illuminating a desk littered with papers, printouts, and a single crystal-clear object, a metal flash drive given to him by Tom Harper. Royce inserted it into his laptop, his fingers covered with thin scars from a long-ago shootout, moving quickly and confidently, his eyes tired and piercing, scanning the open files, extracting the essence from the digital chaos. The screen flashed with scans of yellowed contracts bearing the watermarks of Rivertop Industries, and signatures that Royce instantly identified as those of the late Rivertop Sr. and Jacob Moreland. Blueprints of an industrial pump with Moreland's notes and, most importantly, a series of old photographs. William's father and a young, hopeful Jake standing in front of a huge brick grain terminal in the harbor, their faces smiling, but the shadows suspiciously long in the harsh flashlight. "There it is," Royce muttered, enlarging the photo of the terminal, its number 7 barely legible on the rusty sign above the gate, the place where it all began, and where it looks like it's all gonna end. He turned the screen toward Tom and Alma, who were sitting across from him. Alma clung to the back of her chair, her knuckles white, her eyes full of silent pleading, darting between the photo and the detective's face. Tom stared intently at the familiar outlines of the port buildings. "Terminal number 7, Royce stated, his voice dry and businesslike. "Abandoned for 10 years, according to the records, but David mentioned grain terminals. This is the only one where Rivertop Sr. and Moreland once started something together." "But how can we know for sure?" Tom blurted out, running a hand over his face to brush away fatigue and anxiety. "The port is huge. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of warehouses." Alma suddenly stood up, her movements sharp, almost convulsive. She took a crumpled piece of paper out of the pocket of her worn jacket, Casey's drawing of the black car and the sinister old man. "Look," she whispered, her voice trembling, but with the first hint of hope in hours. Casey drew the building behind the car. It's dark, almost black, made of large bricks, and the windows are high, like slits. She held the drawing up to the laptop screen, to the enlarged photo of Terminal 7. The resemblance was striking. The same gloomy bricks, blackened by time and soot, the same narrow, loopholes-like windows under the roof. "Marcus." Alma closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the evening when her husband had come home from work and told her about it over dinner. He talked about that part of the port, about Terminal 7. His gang called it the Black Hole. They said the bricks were like soot and the police wouldn't go there without reinforcements. Smuggling, weapons. Royce nodded, his gaze sharpening. "The Black Hole? Yes, I've seen that nickname in old reports. So that's where it is." He grabbed his phone and dialed the number of the duty officer, his voice sounding like a steel spring. "Royce, I need an immediate response team. Fully armed, silent approach. The target is an abandoned grain terminal number 7 in the old port. The suspects are armed and holding 2 hostages, including a child. Tactical plan, In 5 minutes in my office. Hanging up, he turned to Tom. Harper, use your connections in the port administration. We need fresh satellite images of Terminal 7, thermal imaging, if available, any data on recent activity, access routes, weak points in the fencing. Tom wasted no time, pulling out his phone and flying his fingers across the screen to contact his former classmate, now a high-ranking official at the port. Tom's voice was tight and demanding. Jerry, it's Tom. A life is on the line. I need all the data on Terminal 7. The old grain terminal now, satellite, heat, everything. Alma stood looking at Casey's drawing, her lips moving silently in prayer. She remembered how her daughter, after finishing the drawing, had said with a seriousness she had not understood at the time, "It's scary, Mom." Like a big black mouth. Meanwhile, Royce unfolded a detailed map of the port area on the table, his scarred finger resting confidently on square number 7. He took out red marker and began to sketch possible approaches, sniper positions, and the likely location of the hostages, based on the typical layout of such warehouses and information about the basement rooms. Here, he pointed to the presumed basement area. That's where they're most likely being held. One entrance through the main gate is suicide, too exposed. We need a back way or ventilation shafts. Tom put down the phone, his face lit up. Jerry found out. Terminal 7 has been officially abandoned for 5 years, but thermal cameras detected movement at the rear entrance last night, and there's an old diagram. There really is a basement there, and... He looked at Alma. There's an emergency ventilation shaft leading to a sewer outside the perimeter. Smugglers used it. Marcus was right. Royce raised his head sharply, his eyes flashing. The coordinates of the shaft. Immediately, and its diameter. Jerry's sending the diagram to your email, Martin. Tom caught his breath. The duct is narrow, but passable for a person. The exit is disguised as a grate in a sewer, 200 meters east of the main gate. There was a knock on the office door. 4 capture team members in black tactical uniforms entered, their faces focused, weapons at the ready. The commander, tall and lean, saluted. Captain Ross, the team is ready, Detective. Awaiting orders and the facility diagram. Royce quickly opened his laptop, showing the newly sent diagram of the terminal and thermal images with 2 clear heat spots in the basement area. He pointed to the ventilation shaft. That's our entrance. Be quiet. Captain, you and 2 fighters go through the shaft into the basement and free the hostages. The rest of you, distract them at the main entrance on my signal. Snipers here and here, on the roofs of the neighboring warehouses, with a clear view of the main entrance and any possible attic windows in the terminal. He turned to Tom and Alma, his gaze heavy. You stay here. This is not a discussion. Our job is to go in, their job is to get out alive. Alma stepped forward, her eyes burning. Casey's in there. My girl. You have to stay here, Mrs. Johnson, Royce interrupted, but his voice softened. To meet her when we bring her out. I promise. He saw in her eyes the same desperation he had seen in his wife's eyes when they stood at the hospital bedside of their daughter Lisa, dying from a bullet, fired by an unknown assailant in a street shooting, a case he had never solved. We can't lose another one, he added quietly, more to himself, adjusting the holster on his belt. Not today. Captain Ross nodded, giving short orders to his men. The group quickly left the office, their footsteps fading silently into the hallway. Royce grabbed his bulletproof vest and pulled it over his shirt, his movements automatic, honed over years of practice. He looked at the last thermal image, at the 2 faint specks of heat in the basement, William and Casey. Let's go, he said to Tom and Alma, his voice steel-hard. Wait here, and believe. He left, closing the door behind him, leaving them in the silence of the office, filled with the hum of alarm and silent prayer. Alma sank into a chair, clutching Casey's drawing, her fingers tracing the lines her daughter had drawn, and she remembered how Marcus had taught her. Faith, Alma, sometimes that's all we have, and it's stronger than fear. Tom walked over to the window, watching as fighters below in the courtyard hurriedly loaded themselves into black, unmarked vans. He saw Royce get into the first vehicle, his profile sharp and unyielding against the morning light. "Hang in there, Will," Tom whispered. "Hang in there for her. For that spark." The vans, their engines humming quietly, pulled away, disappearing into the morning traffic, taking with them the last hope and heavy determination of Detective Martin Royce, for whom this was more than just a job. It was a long-awaited chance at redemption. The dim beam of Captain Ross's flashlight caught the opening of a ventilation shaft. Clenching his fist to signal silence, he was the first to squeeze into the foul-smelling sewer behind the perimeter of Terminal 7, his automatic weapon aimed at the gloomy building. 2 fighters followed silently. A whisper came over the radio. Royce, shadow in position, waiting for thunder. In the basement, Jake Moreland, his face contorted with madness, shook the exhausted William. "Sign the transfer immediately, every last cent. William Rivertoop, Jr., or I swear on the memory of my Emily, you'll make me do something irreparable to this girl." William, barely holding on, tried to break free, his gaze darting to Casey. You've crossed the line, Moreland. Leave her alone." "Boundaries?" Jake roared, grabbing his weapon and pointing it at Casey. "Your father destroyed my boundaries, my life, my future. You think I just want money? I want you to understand the price of a stolen life. Sign it." A deafening explosion shook the walls. Thunder! The main gates of the terminal collapsed. Flashbang grenades blinded the first floor, and the screams of the guards mingled with the crackle of automatic weapons. A guard in the basement jumped up. "Boss! They're storming in! They're here!" Jake froze, his face contorted with rage and panic, a wild cry escaping his lips. "They won't get anything. No money, no witnesses, every single one of them." He lunged toward Casey, grabbing her arm roughly and trying to use her as a shield. "The treasure of my revenge! No!" William's hoarse cry drowned out the din. Summoning his last ounce of strength and forgetting his weakness, he lunged forward, knocking the stunned guard to the ground and threw himself at Jake. The old man, taken by surprise, collapsed, his weapon slipping from his grasp. William leaned over him, trying to restrain him. "This is your war, Moreland. Let her go." Jake, agile in his madness, twisted away, his fingers digging into William's throat. "Die, heir of thieves! Die and take your shame to the grave." The basement hatch flew open with a crash. In the doorway stood Ross, the fighters, and Royce. "Police! Release the child immediately and lay down your weapons." Jake, seeing the guns, howled, yanked Casey closer, and grabbed the knife with his other hand. "Back! If you come any closer, you'll be responsible for her death." Casey screamed, "Mom!" "Drop the knife, Jacob Moreland." Royce's voice was steely, his gun unmoving. "It's over, you're surrounded, your men are neutralized. Let the girl go, and we'll talk about the legality of your claims. Don't make us do this." William, lying on the floor, saw Jake's gun. The memory of Casey's words about the spark pierced him. He rolled over, grabbed the heavy barrel, raised it with trembling hands, aiming not at the man, but at an empty corner, and pulled the trigger. A deafening shot rang out in the confined space. Jake flinched in surprise, loosening his grip. Casey broke free. Royce and Ross reacted instantly. "Disarm him," Royce commanded. The fighters rushed at Jake, pinning his arms. "Call the medics," Royce shouted, jumping down and rushing toward Casey, who was writhing in hysterics. He caught her. "Quiet, sweetheart, quiet. It's over. You're safe. Your mom will be here soon." Tom, who had rushed in behind him, rushed to William. "Will, talk to me. You're a hero, brother. Help, someone help him." William opened his eyes and found Casey. "Casey, is she okay?" "She's safe and sound, Will. You saved her." Tom's voice trembled. Alma burst in with the medics and snatched her daughter from Royce's arms, sobbing, "My baby girl, my brave dear girl. I was so scared. Forgive me." They embraced. The medics quickly surrounded William and began to treat him. Jake, muttering curses and Emily's name, was lifted up and led to the hatch. Royce approached David Clark, who was trembling behind the barrels, and snapped handcuffs on him. "David Clark, you are under arrest for complicity in kidnapping. Your rights—" David began to sob silently, his face contorted with shame. Royce looked around the basement. Chaos, dust, tears of relief bound criminals. He glanced at the wallet with his daughter's photo, silently saying, Today, we saved this girl, Lisa. The warm Louisiana sun, already stripped of its summer aggression, gently bathed the bench in a quiet park near the renovated neighborhoods, where a stack of new books about dinosaurs, smelling of printing ink, lay on the table in front of Casey Johnson. Stars and brave explorers, and her fingers reverently turned the pages with their bright illustrations. William Rivertoup sat next to her, his face still bearing traces of his recent trials, but his gaze, once empty and bored, was now clear and deeply thoughtful as he watched the sunbeams play in the dark curls of her hair. "I chose them with the help of Miss Ellen, from the library," he said quietly, his voice sounding unusually soft and without his usual barrier of distance. "She said they would be the best start for a young explorer with your mind and courage." Casey looked up at him with shining eyes, a broad smile revealing a familiar dimple. "Thank you so much, Mr. Rivertoup. I'll read everyone and tell you all the interesting things, I promise." "Please just call me Will, Casey," he corrected, a slight shadow of former awkwardness flashing in his eyes. "After everything we went through in that terrible place, formalities seem unnecessary." Alma, sitting on the other side of her daughter, put her hand on William's shoulder, her eyes, always so tired, now shining with deep peace and gratitude. "The Marcus Foundation. It's already started working, Will. The first children from Hope have received scholarships, and the repairs to the shelter are almost complete. You gave them a chance." William nodded, his gaze fixed on the children playing in the distance. "Selling part of the business was the only right decision, Alma. The foundation must be independent of market fluctuations and my past mistakes. Tom is completely immersed in his work, and his energy and honesty are the best driving force for this cause. I finally realized that true wealth is not measured by the numbers in your bank account, but by the ability to change someone's life for the better." He fell silent, and the silence, filled only with the chirping of birds and the laughter of children, hung between them, peaceful and healing, requiring no words. The three of them sat on the bench, united by the nightmare they had endured and the understanding they had gained, watching the golden leaves slowly swirl in the autumn air. William took out his phone, his fingers dialing a number in Miami he hadn't called in a long time, and when he heard his father's familiar, slightly haughty voice on the other end, he said calmly and firmly, "Mom, Dad, it's Will. I want to come home. Not to discuss deals or dividends. I have something to tell you. About real life, about real courage, about people who teach us to see the light even in the deepest darkness." In his office, Detective Martin Royce closed a thick folder labeled "The Rivertop Moreland Case." Closed, and his hand fell on an old wallet which he opened, looking at the ever-smiling face of his daughter Lisa in a faded photograph. "Today was a good day, sweetheart," he whispered, his usually stern features softening into a rare expression of peace. "One story ended right. One girl is home, one man found his way back to people. Maybe that's the balance we're looking for." Casey returned home to their new, bright, and safe apartment, the keys to which William had handed to Alma with the words, "This is not a gift, it is a debt of honor," took out a clean sheet of paper and colored pencils. Her tongue stuck out in concentration, and her fingers confidently drew lines. There were no more black cars or evil shadows in the picture. Above the city, from the glass towers to the familiar streets of her old neighborhood, a huge, kind, radiant sun shone, flooding every corner, every roof, every smiling figure below, with golden light. She signed the drawing in the corner. "My city, our son, Casey."